Shalom, shalom, greetings and blessings to our Bantu family. As I've mentioned in my introduction, I told you that I was going to give you this lesson which I'm going to cover. How did we forget our Hebrew-Israelite identity? I'm going to delve into history and I'm going to show you the Hebrew-Israelite migrations, how our ancestors moved through Egypt and moved to north, to east, to west, as well as to southern Africa. And eventually these migrations led to the so-called Bantu migrations. And after the Bantu migrations, we cover the Arab slave trade. How did the Arabs colonize our people? How did they took them from East Africa and scattered them throughout the Mediterranean as well as in Indian Ocean? Then we're going to cover the last migration of our people as to how did they get to those lands in America, Brazil, even Europe. So during the so-called transatlantic slave trade. And we're going to see scriptures which emphasize more on the reasons. And we're going to see that all these things happened because our forefathers did not obey the Most High Elohim. So it is in Deuteronomy 38 where we learn about the evils and troubles which the Most High promised our forefathers, which will happen if they don't obey, if they don't observe His laws and commandments. So verse 63 to 64 is one of the scriptures which explains how we will be scattered among all people and for what reason. So verse 63 says, "And it shall come to pass that as Yahweh rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so Yahweh will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to nothing. And you shall be plucked from off the land whither you goes to possess it." You see, so the Most High actually rejoiced over us to do us good or to do them good and as well as to multiply them. But eventually they rejected that idea which He presented. So eventually they went in a opposite way. So as a result, the Most High was very rejoiceful to destroy them and to bring them to nothing. Then eventually He plucked them off the land. And then what happened next? So verse 64 tells us that, "And Yahweh shall scatter you among all people, and from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there you shall serve other mighty ones, which neither you nor your fathers have known, even wood and stone." You see, so here we are reading about our origin. We are reading about our background of where we come from. As you can see, we were scattered among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. So this is what is called diaspora. And today, wherever we are scattered, it's not a coincidence that we serve other gods. And it is amazing that we serve other strange gods which we don't know. And now the scripture tells us that even our forefathers never knew. So it means that wood and stone is in relation to religion, because that is basically what we do in this generation. We have identified ourselves with different religions which we have no idea where do they come from. But we know that most of them, we got them by the sword. You see, so it is in the next lesson titled "A Conspiracy to Hide Our Hebrew-Israelite Identity," where we're going to learn what is wood and what is stone. So you're going to see that wood and stone is actually religion.
So to begin our journey, we shall begin in the land of Israel, the land of Canaan. This is the land that was allotted to the 12 tribes of Israel, and the land that they were scattered from, starting with the earliest dispersals in 722 BCE by the Assyrian Empire. In fact, some Africans have ancient Jewish heritage and consider themselves descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Around 926 BCE, the kingdom of Israel split into two, Previously, all 12 tribes of Israel had been united under the monarchies of Saul, David, and Solomon. But when Solomon's son, Rehoboam, acceded to the throne, the 10 northern tribes rebelled and seceded from the union. This only left 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, under the control of the king in Jerusalem. From that time on, the tribes were divided into 2 nations, which came to be called the House of Israel, or the 10 northern tribes, and the House of Judah, or the 2 southern tribes. When the Assyrians conquered the House of Israel around 722 BCE, they deported the native populations to other places throughout the Assyrian kingdom. Many Israelites made their way across the Silk Road, ending up in Asia and Africa, where they intermarried with the peoples among whom they settled. They eventually abandoned their distinct identity and culture that was lost to history. These are the groups referred to as the Lost Tribes of Israel. So when it comes to those Israelites scattered by the Assyrian kings, there are many claims and theories of where they ended up settling. Some suggest they made their way into Asia or Europe or even the Americas before assimilating into the native populations. But is there any evidence for an African migration? I am of the belief that after various waves and migrations from the Near East, Israelites and Judeans made their way into Africa, later penetrating the Sahara with their superior iron weaponry, taking over whatever land they felt was plentiful and best fit for their agricultural way of life. But is there any evidence to support this claim? Actually, existing research shows that over the centuries, while Jews migrated north, east, and west, they also went south throughout Africa. Pressed under regional sweeping conflicts, Jews settled as traders and warriors in Yemen, the Horn of Africa, Egypt, the Kingdom of Cush and Nubia, North African Punic settlements such as Carthage and Volubilis, and now areas covered by Mauritania. More immigrants followed these early Jewish settlers to northern Africa, following the Assyrian conquest of the Israelites in the 8th century BCE, and again 200 years later when Jerusalem was conquered by the Babylonians, leading to the destruction of the First Temple. The Jewish presence in Africa began to expand significantly in the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Christian era, extending not only into the Sahara Desert, but also reaching down along the West African coast, and possibly also to some Bantu tribes in southern Africa. In addition, Jewish, Arab, and Christian accounts cite the existence of Jewish rulers of certain tribal groups and clans identifying themselves as Jewish scattered throughout Mauritania, Senegal, the Western Sudan, Nigeria, and Ghana. The African story parallels that of other Jewish groups throughout the diaspora. In Africa, as in other places around the world, there are long-standing communities with greater or lesser degrees of continuous practice, depending on how safe they were. These are those who have Jewish heritage and now practice other religions, either through assimilation or through forced conversions. Some may live as Christians or Muslims and have little sense of their Jewish past. However, others live as Christians or Muslims, yet are proud of their Jewish ancestry. There are also those who discovered Judaism and decided to convert to Judaism. These are more recent newcomers to the Jewish people. Whether ancient or new, a distinctive trait of African communities result from historical isolation from rabbinical Judaism. Their Judaism has either been passed on through oral tradition or is practiced as pre-Talmudic Torah-based Judaism. These communities would like to be a part of world Judaism. First thing we shall do is gain a scriptural understanding of the events that led to those deportations of the northern tribes of Israel.
Chapter 17.
In the 12th year of Ahaz king of Judah began Hoshea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant, and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up, and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria, and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes.
Now, after reviewing those scriptures, we should have an idea of who took Israel and where they were deported to. Now let's trace those migrations back westward to Africa from the first captivity. And to do that, we're going to begin with the oral traditions of Eldad the Danite. These traditions are important because they recant one of the earliest Israelite diasporas known throughout all of Jewish history. It was even written in the Talmudic writings. So let's deal with the history of Eldad ben Mali. The oral traditions of Eldad begins in the land of Israel during the time of Jeroboam's succession and the time of the split of the kingdom of Israel. Specifically, during this time, King Jeroboam wanted the Danites to make war against the tribes of Judah. However, instead of shedding blood against their brother and making war against their brother, they proclaimed throughout all the land of Dan to fly to Egypt and kill all the inhabitants of Egypt. But how could you fly to Egypt? Asked one of the princes. Is it not written throughout the law that ye shall see them again no more? However, it is said that God gave the Danites good advice to go up the river Pishon and to continue their wanderings on camels and to encamp into the land of Cush. After growing plentiful year after year, it is said that 3 other tribes, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, came and encamped with the Danites within the land of Cush. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to this story and this history, many authors and historians fail to continue the story of Eldad, falling short within the boundaries of Cush. But indeed, we can go further west, so let's dig into that. Now, to do that, we'll be looking into the French source Relation d'Eldad le Danite to get some further insight, because interestingly, they go deeper into this history. We'll be beginning on page 28, and everything we'll be reading from specifically will be highlighted to the left, and the translation will be to the right. So, beginning on page 28, it reads, "At that time, several families of 3 other tribes of Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali also went out and encamped in Arabia until they reached the borders of Cush. They made war on the Cushites and killed so many that they depopulated a space of 4 days by 4 days to the place occupied by their brothers of the race of Dan, having chosen Havilah as his home, which should not be confused with the eastern Havilah, where there is gold, and Seba, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabat Cha, and Sheba, and Dedan. These 4 tribes, Dan, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali, were forced to fight against these 7 kingdoms." Page 29. "Soon they made the heads of their enemies bow before them, and established themselves in their places in these 7 kingdoms. Nevertheless, every year until today, they are in hostility with 7 other tribes, forming as many sovereignties, called the Mani, Kabar, Korotia, Bedra, Nabat, Aur, and Yoba. As a result of these continuous wars, many Israelites were scattered beyond the rivers of Cush, so that the word of the prophet would be fulfilled. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my scattered worshippers will bring me my offering. So thus far, after reading this book, we've gained insight on the fact that 4 tribes, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, made their way into the land of Cush before continuing beyond the rivers of Ethiopia into a land known as Havilah. And they said specifically not to be confused with the Eastern Havilah. So if not the Eastern Havilah, then where is the Havilah that Eldad was making mention to? Interestingly, if we take a look into the book, The Itinerary of Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela, he mentions something very, very similar that connects to what Eldad was claiming. So if we start on page 146, it reads, "From Aswan to Chula, 12 days. This place contains about 300 Jews and is the starting point of the caravans who transverse the desert Al-Tahara or Al-Sahara in 50 days on their way to Zavilah, the Chavilah of Scripture, which is in the country of Ghana." So interestingly, Rabbi Tudela says that this Chavilah or Savila or Havilah is in the country of Ghana. And we know that this is specifically in West Africa and not in East Africa, because on page 146, he goes on to say that this country lies westward of Cush or Abyssinia. But let's dig deeper into that. And to do that, we're going to go to Archives More Arcanes, Volume 6. On page 68, it mentions something very, very interesting. It says quite simply that Eldad calls Negritia by the name of Havilah. And last time I checked, Negritia is the name of West Africa. So we actually have 2 Jewish historians, Rabbi Benjamin as well as Eldad the Danite, placing Havilah within West Africa. Is this because places like Ghana is referenced as the land of gold as well? But let's continue to dig into this history. And to do that, we're going to try to identify one more location that Eldad made mention to, and that is the Sambatyon River. So let's go to a history of the Jewish people to get a little bit more information on the details surrounding this Sambatyon River. Starting on page 278, it reads, Eldad, son of Mali the Danite, alleged that he was a descendant of the tribe of Dan. He related that this tribe had immigrated from their Palestinian home so as not to take part in the civil war at that time of Jerusalem's secession. And were residing in the land of Havilah beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. 3 other tribes, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, were with them. These had joined them in the times of Sennacherib. Opposite them lived the children of Moses, sprung from those Levites who had mutilated the fingers of their right hand rather to sing the songs of Zion by the rivers of Babylon, and had then been translated by a cloud to their present abode. His own people, so Eldad continued, were able to communicate with them only from afar, since they were cut off from one another by a waterless torrent which carried masses of sand and rubble with such terrific force that it could crush an iron mountain. This impassable river rested on the Sabbath day when it was enveloped in a thick mist. Hence the river was named Sambatyon. Now after reading this, a river didn't necessarily pop up in my head. Now let's reread over these details to get an understanding of exactly what Eldad was talking about. It says, his own people, so Eldad continued, were able to communicate with them only from afar, since they were cut off from one another by a waterless torrent, which carried masses of sand and rubble with such terrific force that it could crush an iron mountain. This impassable river rested on a Sabbath day when it was enveloped in a thick mist. Hence, the river was named Sambont Yon. So after reading this again, it really sounds as if Eldad was describing a desert. If we go back to the itinerary of Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela, he describes the Sahara Desert that the Jews traverse the same way Eldad described the Sambont Yon River. And it reads, from Aswan to Chula, 12 days. This place contains about 300 Jews and is the starting point of the caravans who transverse the desert Al-Tahara in 50 days on their way to Sevilla, the Chavila of Scripture, which is in the country of Ghana. This desert contains mountains of sand, and whenever a storm arises, the caravans are exposed to the imminent danger of being buried alive by the sand. Alright, so now we're starting to see why Eldad described the Sahara Desert as a waterless torrent which carried masses of sand and rubble. Let's continue on to the empires of medieval West Africa, because this complements the traditions of Eldad as well. And it reads, on the southern fringe of the Sahara is the Sahel, a marginal area of transition from desert to savanna. Sahel is the Arabic word for shore. It is as if the Sahara were a great ocean of sand and rock. The camels that transport goods across the desert were ships, and the large market towns were the seaports. Alright, so now we should definitely have an understanding of why Eldad referred to this desert, this Sahara, as a great ocean of sand and rock, as a waterless torrent. So now that we went through that information, let's go even deeper into proving that West Africa was the location of Eldad and his tribesmen. And to do that, we're going to visit another French source by the title of Archives Marocains, Volume 6. Starting on page 67, it reads, Eldad the Danite appeared in the cities of the coast of the Maghreb around 860 to 880. He had come from the desert, from Sudan or Negritia, and claimed to belong to the independent Jewish tribes of the Danites, one of the 10 extinct tribes of Israel, which he said had immigrated from Ethiopia or Negritia. He spoke only Hebrew, but a special Hebrew, a dialect which differs from all that we know of this language and which could be linked to the Hebrew Phoenician. Apart from the Danites, his own tribe, they were in Negritia, according to him. 3 other tribes of Israel, enjoying all them a considerable political and material prosperity and making war on the Negro kingdoms situated in the desert and separated from the Israelites by a sabbatical river which drew during the week streams of sand and stone. Continuing on to the footnotes of page 67, it reads, the tribes of Dan would have come to Ethiopia from Egypt, while the 3 other Jewish tribes of Negritia, those of Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, would have come from Arabia, which confirms the hypothesis put forward by Mr. Lee Chandler on the origins of Jews in West Africa. Continuing on. It is difficult not to see in all this information, which is both reality and legend, data on the migrations of the Judaizing and Libo-Punic tribes driven back by the Muslims as far as the ocean and from there to the Sudan. Indeed, the existence of the Jewish independence in the Sahara around the 9th and 1st centuries is confirmed by the traditions of Kitab el-Adunai that we have already mentioned, as well as certain indications of other Arab historians, the most important of which is that of Qatar's. Continuing on to page 71, it reads, Eldad certainly visited certain Jewish tribes in the Sahara. He has heard many things said of certain others. He knows its uses and beliefs to the point that Mr. Epstein has succeeded in identifying them with those of the Phalashas, whose common Hellenic origin with the ancient warriors of Caesarea had been supposed by us. It is also possible that he confused the Bene Musa with the powerful tribe of Masai, which he may have not have visited himself, since we have managed to identify most of the names of Negro kingdoms with geographical names of the Adrar region of French Mauritania and even of Western Sudan. We would therefore not follow Mr. Epstein where he refuses to admit that West Africa was the country of origin of the Danite.
Say, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
So wait 1 second. You mean to tell me that authors actually refuse to admit that West Africa was the country of origin of Eldad the Danite and his tribesmen? Is this why throughout history we always see this story referring to Ethiopian Jews opposed to West African? But let's continue to bring out this groundbreaking information and show where Eldad and his Israelite relatives settled within West Africa. Reading from page 71, it reads, We will devote a separate study to it among the geographical names given by Eldad and often manipulated by the copyists. We thought we could identify a certain number, of which here are a few. Adrar or Adrar, Todima or Kadima, Kukia, Countu or Kumtu, Toreka or Tekror, Tukulur, Kuba or Kechi, Karma or Kartas, and additionally, let us point out the names of Hohom and Zomaron, which we find in southern Morocco. Now let me read over those names one more time, just in case these locations went over your head. It reads, locations such as Adrar, Todima or Kadima, Kukuya, Countu or Kumtu, Toreka or Tukor, Tukulur, Kuba or Kechi, Karma or Kartas, and additionally Hohom and Zomaron in southern Morocco. So these West African territories is where these northern tribes settled and formed a kingdom, according to Eldad. Even if we continue, we'll find something else that's very confirming. And it reads, it must be added to this information that Eldad the Danite had been accompanied in his travels by another Jew of the desert who had traced his origin to the tribe of Asher, son of Jacob, or among the Mandi or Suniki tribes, of which some trace their origins to the chiefs of the tribes of Israel. Various pieces of information indicating very early immigrants to Africa from the Semitic world do exist. During the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. According to Jewish authors, some Hebrews or Israelites tried to escape their wrath by fleeing into Africa. Speaking of the Jews, Lichbald says, pressed on the regional conflicts, Jews settled as warriors and traders in Yemen, the Horn of Africa, Egypt, the Kingdom of Cush and Nubia, North African Punic settlements, and areas now covered by Mauritania. More immigrants followed these early Jewish settlers to Africa following the Assyrian conquest of the Israelites in the 8th century BCE. Rabbi Dalton Nasi has placed the Hebrew-Israelites all over the African continent. Now, to establish for a fact that Israelite migrations were taking place as early as the 7th or 8th century BCE, we will deal with one of the first stopping points within Africa, the places where Jeremiah and Hosea warned Israel not to go. This place is known as Elephantine or Aswan, Egypt. According to the Black Jews of Africa by Edith Brewer, historians usually date the settling of Jewish soldiers in the region of Elephantine back to the middle of the 7th century BCE, specifically at the time when Manasseh was free from his Assyrian overlord and was able to provide mercenaries to Egypt in order to obtain their support. Now this gets very, very interesting, because we actually see a time within scripture where Hosea is speaking of the northern kingdom or the house of Ephraim fleeing the land of Israel to make their way into Egypt. Verses 10 through 16 of Hosea 7 reads, "And the pride of Israel testified to his face, and that they do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all this. Ephraim also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, and they go to Assyria. When they shall go, I will spread my net upon them. I will bring them down as the fowls of the heavens. I will chastise them, as their congregation have heard. Woe unto them, for they have fled from me. Destruction unto them, because they have transgressed against me. Though I have redeemed them, yet they have spoken lies against me. And they have not cried unto me with their hearts. When they howled upon their beds, they assembled themselves for corn and wine, and they rebelled against me. Though I have bound and strengthened their arms, yet do they imagine mischief against me. They return, but not to the Most High. They are like deceitful bow. Their princes shall fall by the sword for the range of their tongue.
This shall be their derision in the land of Egypt."
Now that's very interesting, because the book The Jews of Africa tells us that Sargon or Sennacherib, the successor of Shalmaneser III, king of Assyria, having continued the war commenced by his predecessors, conquered the kingdom of Israel and brought the captive Jews and their king Hoshea to his country around 722 BCE, and from thence they eventually found their way into Abyssinia and Ethiopia. Again, this is just showing that indeed during the time of the Assyrian exile, Israelites were seeking refuge in Africa. But for now, let's deal with the origin of the Jewish colony of Senin, Aswan. Now, when looking at this Aramaic papyri found in Aswan, the occurrence of persons named Hoshea is especially frequented. Throughout various subscribed papyri, Israelites bear the name of Hoshea. For example, we find names such as Hosea, son of Petinun, Hosea, son of Peliah, and also Hosea, son of Riyah, which were found throughout these papyri in Aswan. So with this frequency of the name Hosea, it may be a clue to the origin of the Jewish colony in Upper Egypt. In the Bible, the name Hosea is almost exclusively applied to Ephraimites. The oldest bearer of the name is Hosea, son of Nun, of the tribe of Ephraim. Now this solitary exception does not hinder us from concluding that the name Hoshea was especially common in the northern kingdom, and particularly in the tribe of Ephraim, as then this name appears in the colony of Senin and Elephantine as one of the commonest personal names. It seems reasonable to suggest that this colony, at least part, consisted of descendants of people belonging to the 10 tribes. It goes on to say that the suggestion derived from these two names, such as Hosea and Menahem, which is also found in the papyri as well, may serve to throw a clear light on the Jewish colonists at Senin. They were in part at least descendants of the 10 tribes who with their Persian army under Cambyses had come from their second home in Assyria and Media to Egypt, where they received grants of land. So as we can see, Israelites indeed made their way into Africa, especially into Aswan and Senin. Now moving on, we can see that tribes actually left Senin or Aswan for West Africa. Two of those tribes, to name a few, are the Akan and the Soninke. We can go to the African Fact Book to look at some of this history. The traditions of the Soninke founders of the Ghana Empire, from whose ashes rose the Mali and Songhai empires at different times, asserts that their remote founding ancestor was born in the region of Sona or Aswan in Upper Egypt. Now, Boubacar Alam actually situates the departure of the Soninke ancestors from Egypt no later than 486 BC as a result of the extractions of the Persian king Darius on the inhabitants of the Nile Valley. The foundations of the society and state that would later become the Empire of Ghana will have occurred no later than 460 BC. Now, this is important because when we was reviewing the history of Eldad the Danite and how those tribes that he was talking about made their way from Egypt into Ethiopia into West Africa, he actually mentioned that he was traveling throughout Africa with a Soninke Jew of the desert. But continuing on, the Khans are said to be blood relatives of the Soninke of the old Ghana Empire, who are now spread over modern-day Senegal, Gambia, Mali, Mauritania, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and Guinea-Bissau. According to Boubacar Alam, the earliest kingdoms of the Western Sudan from about 460 BC were Neo-Pharaonic kingdoms and will remain so until the beginning of the Islamization on the region with the Almoravid conquest around 1076 AD. Now, this actually mirrors the traditions of Eldad, who spoke about the Jewish kingdoms in West Africa coming to an end as a result of the invading Muslims around 1076 AD. So when it comes to Israelites migrating into Africa, that can be applied to the southern kingdom of Judah as well. And to look at that history, we can go back to the origin of the Jewish colony of Sinim. Within Sinim, the northern kingdom constituted a common colony together with Judeans, who had probably come to Egypt either directly from Judea or from Babylonia with the Persian army. The mixed character of the colony would explain the surprising circumstances that this member are sometimes designated Jews or Judeans and sometimes Arameans, as Jews would be designated only those members of the colony who came from the province of Judah or who were descendants of Judeans coming from Babylon. On the other hand, descendants of the 10 tribes will be called Arameans. At all events, we may assume that the descendants of the 10 tribes were not yet called Judeans in the time of the first Persian kings, when the Ephraimites found themselves in Aswan side by side with Judeans and united in one community. So even after the time of the Babylonian exile, you had Judeans find their way into this community where the northern tribes were already settled. So the Assyrians were not the only kings to come up against Israel. 200 years later, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the first temple. Again, the Israelites tried to escape persecution and ran into the continent of Africa, even after they were instructed by Jeremiah not to. And we can take a look at some of those instructions, or rather warnings, by Jeremiah in the book of Jeremiah chapter 44 verses 26 through 27. It says, "Therefore hear ye the word of the Lord, all Judah that dwell in the land of Egypt. Behold, I have sworn by my great name, saith the Lord, that my name shall no more be named in the mouth of any man of Judah in all the land of Egypt, saying, the Lord God liveth. Behold, I will watch over them for evil, and not for good. And all men of Judah that are in the land of Egypt shall be consumed by the sword and by the famine, until there be an end of them." Continuing back to the reading, it says that the rebels even applied to the queen of heaven, Ishtar, by burning incense to call upon her favors in struggle against Babylon. The compatriots of Jeremiah were carried away into Egypt. He joined them under protest. The prophet warned them that he was going to push the king Nebuchadnezzar into Egypt and capture both Egypt and them. This warning could have caused many Israelites to migrate even deeper into Africa. According to Grizel, some Jewish mercenaries were employed by the Babylonians to guard the southern Egyptian border around 600 BC. They needed soldiers to protect the southern frontier of Egypt against the attacks of the Ethiopians. He added that they gave them the land in the district called Aswan and granted them permission to build a temple and offer sacrifices to their god. So we can see that even the southern kingdom made their way into Egypt, and with warnings from Jeremiah the prophet about things to come, these Judeans possibly would have migrated even deeper into Africa during that time and even after. Moving on to the book Between East and West, a history of the Jews of North Africa. It gives us some insight on Judeans migrating into Africa after the Babylonian exile. It reads, "It would be futile to try to fix a precise date for the establishment of the first Jewish settlements in North Africa, but it is generally accepted that the first communities of any importance date from about the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BCE. The second exile to Babylon was accompanied by a westward migration. Certain communities, among them the Jerba, maintain an oral tradition that they were founded at that time." Come on now. We're going to jump to the genius of the Bantu, a study of the Bantu tribes of Africa, okay? It is allowed that groups of Israelitish peoples have from time to time journeyed into the Upper Nile country, but this does not seem to sufficiently account for the large assets of influence of which the Bantu are the concrete result. Alright, let me read that again. It is allowed that groups of Israelitish people have from time to time journeyed into the Upper Nile country, but this does not seem to be sufficiently accounted for the large assets of influence of which the Bantu are the concrete result. So what they trying to say is the Bantus were influenced by the Israelites, but we're going to furthermore prove to you that the Bantus are the Israelites who came out of captivity, who migration started out of captivity from the Tigris and the Euphrates, from the Assyrian captivity. In the absence of direct proof of an extensive migration, this hypothesis brings us two considerations: those of customs, religious and otherwise, also those of language relations. The contentions has been made that the extraneous elements of the Bantu was derived from the tribes of Israel. Alright, they just said the extraneous element of the Bantu was derived from the tribes of Israel. Furthermore, which were first carried away to Babylon, as related to the scriptures, and afterwards in whole or in part migrated through Egypt into equatorial Africa, and through mingling with native tribes upon whom they imposed much of their own religion and customs, gave rise to the people now known as Bantu. Didn't we just read that they came out of the Babylonian area? Didn't we just read that they had dialects of Assyrian and Babylonian in their language? Didn't we just read that these people migrated from this area? Now we come to another source and they letting us know that what? Extremist elements of the Bantu was derived from the tribes of Israel, which were first carried away to Babylon as related in scripture, and afterwards in whole or in part migrated through Egypt into equatorial Africa, alright? And through mingling with the native tribes upon whom they imposed much of their own religion and customs, gave rise to the Bantu people now known. Alright. So the Israelites coming out of Babylon, going into Africa, was the Bantus, all right? This is your so-called Bantu migration. The little maps they show you of them coming out of Western Africa into Central Africa and into Eastern Africa, they don't show you how they got to Western Africa, all right? They just show you their little migration out of Western Africa. But we showing you the true migration after the Babylonian captivity into Africa, all right? But let's continue to bring some information out on this. Let's continue to dig into this and prove this without a shadow of a doubt, that the Bantus are the Israelites, all right? The Negro Congos are the Israelites, all right? Time coincidence. The approximate date of the Bantu immigration has been placed as far back as 2,000 years ago, with a likelihood of some centuries earlier. This authority bases his conclusion on linguistic data. The Israelites' exodus from Mesopotamia regions must have occurred about the same time, occurred about the time suggested, as far as we have any means of judging, all right? So they saying that the Israelite migration from Mesopotamia, from Babylon, from the Tigris, from the Euphrates, happened around the same time as the Bantu immigration or the Bantu migrations, all right? We just brought out how the Bantus migrated from Babylon, how the Bantus migrated from the Tigris and the Euphrates. So here we go again, them letting us know that the Bantus are the Israelites, all right? The Israelites' exodus from Mesopotamia happened at the same time as the Bantu migration from Mesopotamia. They are the same people.
So after the people of Israel from the southern kingdom, after they came back from the Babylonian captivities, they went back into the land of Israel in Jerusalem. Then the Persians came on down there and took the Israelite and made them slaves. But the Persian captivities was not as severe as the other captivities. And the Most High, during that time, the Most High had mercy on the Israelite and allowed them to stay in Jerusalem and build up the cities or the temple of David. And right after that, you had the Greeks who came up and took the Israelites and made them slaves. But the Greek captivities is actually not recorded in the ordinary Bible that we have. There's 60 books of the Bible that we have. You have to go into the Apocrypha to actually get the account of the Greek captivities. So now let's go back into the Apocrypha to get the account of the Greek captivities that happened during that time. In consideration of these things, Judas chose Eupolemus, the son of John, the son of Achos, and Jason, the son of Eleazar, and sent them to Rome and make a league of amity and confederacy with them, and to entreat them that they would take the yoke from them. For they saw that the kingdom of the Grecians did oppress Israel with servitude. So this is basically the Greek captivities that's going on. But this is not giving a detailed explanation of what happened during the Greek captivities. But if you go further back in the book of Maccabees, in the chapter number 1, you're going to get the accounts of the full story of the Greek captivity that happened during that time in Jerusalem. So basically, there are so many verses that go into this. There's 64 verses that go into this in the chapter, the first chapter of the books of Maccabees in the Apocrypha. So because there's so many verses, we cannot go into it. It's time consuming. So I'm going to drop the link below for everybody to be able to download it for free. But you can Google it and download it for free. And if you have like a iPhone, you can just go to the Apple Store and download it for free. It's part of the King James Version Bible, the Apocrypha. You can get it for free anywhere. So basically, I'm just going to give you a little snippet of what happened during that time. So the Greeks that came on down there in Jerusalem to enslave the people. So they captured Judah, and then they sought to Hellenize the people, and they brought in their own people, and they start to impose the paganistic customs on the people of Israel. And they were going cities by cities throughout Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, house by house, and they were checking on the people. And if anybody happened to be caught to practice the Hebraic faith, or still keeping the law of the Most High in the Old Testament, they would be put to death. So they sought to Hellenize the Jews, and they were sacrificing swines and pigs on the altar, which was an abomination to the Judean, to the Israelite. That was against the practice and the customs of the Israelite. And as a result of that, as a result of this religious persecution, many Judeans fled into Africa. They went into the countries of Africa, and that marks the another migration of the Israelite, and it matches up perfectly with the migration of the Bantus. The Bantus of the Southern Kingdom that left over there, who were left over there in the land after the Northern Kingdom went into the first captivities of the Assyrians. The second migration started with the Babylonian captivities. During the Babylonian captivities, some Israelites or Judean that went into Africa, Egypt, because you remember I told you they signed treaties with the Egyptian to fight against the Babylonian. And during the Greek captivities, there was a lot of atrocities that befell the children of Israel, and as a result of that, they fled into Africa because they couldn't take it, and they were not even allowed to circumcise the kid, which is one of the major customs of the Hebrews. You have to circumcise a kid, but they were not allowed to do that. And if any woman happened to get caught circumcises their kid, she will be put to death. If you get caught still practicing the Hebraic faith, you're going to be put to death. So they imposed their culture, the pagan culture, on the people of the land. And the people, as a result of that, they fled into Africa. They couldn't take it anymore. So now we're going to go into the history book, because it is recorded into in the history book. So now we're going to go into the history book and to get a little bit more detailed information on that, on the Greek captivities. And you're going to find out exactly what happened. And the Greek captivities actually led up to a major migration of the Bantus into Africa, which are the Israelites. In the year 331, that Alexander the Great defeated the Persian Emperor Darius at the Battle of Gaugamela. A new master emerged on the world stage and transformed the history and culture of three continents. However, Alexander died in the prime of his life at the age of 32 because of debauchery and intoxication. Before the death of Alexander, his desire was to establish a Eurasian state. His scheme was to amalgamate the Greeks with the Asians. This was implemented by the widespread marriage of his troops with the colored women of the East. Most of his troops remained in the subjugated countries and became absorbed into the native population. After the death of Alexander, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Ptolemy received Egypt and Seleucus received Asia. As time elapsed, there was constant war between these two dynasties. By the year 198 BC, the descendants of General Seleucus had their capital in Syria, just north of Palestine. In this same year, the Seleucid dynasty in Syria compelled Egypt to give up Palestine, the land of the Jews. The king of Syria at this time was Antiochus III. When Antiochus IV usurped the throne in Syria, he entertained the thought of uniting Alexander's empire. This meant the conquest of Egypt. However, the province that bordered on Egypt was Palestine, which stood in his way. At this time, the Jews would not accept Greek culture. Nevertheless, Antiochus was determined to Hellenize the Jews. The army of Antiochus marched into Palestine to support Menelaus, the leader of the pro-Syrian party. As a result of that, many Jews were killed, others escaped to the hills and to Egypt. Only those Jews that supported Antiochus' policies remained in Jerusalem. An edict was promulgated interdicting the observance of the holidays, the Sabbath, and circumcision. A statue of Jupiter was erected in the holy temple above the altar. To this statue, the people brought the sacrifices of pig meat, the animal which is an abomination to the Jews. Because of this religious persecution, the legitimate high priest Onias III and many other Jews fled into African countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, and Cyrenaica, Libya. Throughout the last 2,500 years, the main factors that have contributed to the social migration of the Jews were wars, religious persecution, and commerce. All these factors were operating and gave rise to the African Jewish population. See, this is the same exact thing that happened in the Bible. So this book is giving you the account of the Greek captivities with the Israelite, with the Southern Kingdom, and it's the same exact thing in the book, in the Apocrypha, in the books of Maccabees. When you read the first chapter of the books of Maccabees, he's giving you exactly the same story, and that's what they did. The Greeks, they came over there in the land of Israel and they enslaved the Southern Kingdom, and they killed many Jews, and they Hellenized the Judean. And they imposed their culture on them, and they converted. They were seeking to convert the people of Israel into their pagan religion. And if anyone happened to get caught practicing the Hebraic faith, the custom written in the first 5 books of Moses, they will be put to death. And they forbade the people of Israel to circumcise the kid, to observe the Sabbath, to practice their faith, their Hebraic faith. And as a result of that, as a result of this religious persecution, many Judeans or the people of Jerusalem couldn't take it. So they fled into Africa. A lot of them fled into Africa, and that marks the beginning, not the beginning, but that was one of the major migration of the Bantus into Africa. And this actually happened with the complicity of the people of Tyre and Zidon and all the coast of Palestine. Those are the ones who helped the Greeks to enslave the people of Israel. Those are the neighboring countries of the Israelites: Tyre, Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine. They participate in the enslavement of the people of Israel. And eventually the people of Israel, a lot of them from Judah, they went into Africa, deep into Africa, running away from the Greeks. So obviously they went over there and they met their other brothers from the other kingdom, from the northern kingdom, who were already there, who left Israel a long time ago during the Assyrian captivities. So basically that was a major migration of the Bantus from the southern kingdom of Israel that went into Africa, running away from the Greeks that was persecuting them, Hellenizing the Jews, and they couldn't take it. So they had to flee from Israel into Africa so they can find a safety place to live there. So obviously the continent of Africa was already filled with a bunch of Israelites, because the northern kingdom was already there. And during the Babylonian captivities, you have a portion of the Jews, along with the prophet Jeremiah, who went down there to Africa in Egypt. And during the Greek captivities, there was a great deal of the people. There was a major migration that happened with the Judeans from the tribe of Judah. They went straight into Africa, running away from the Greeks' persecution. So obviously the continent was already filled with a bunch of Judeans and the northern kingdom. So now we're going to go into the Roman the rulership during the time of Christ, and that is going to be that's going to mark the beginning of the last migration of the Israelites, because the last migration happened after the Messiah. So now this is the time of Christ, who you call the time of the Messiah. Now, in this passage here, this is a high priest from the tribe of Levi, and this happened in Jerusalem, in one of the cities of Judea. So these men, he was talking about the Messiah that is going to die for the people of Israel. And he says that he was talking to the people that were seeking to destroy or to kill the Messiah, even though he wasn't doing anything, because they were set up by the Roman to destroy the Messiah. Because like I said, at this time the nation of Israel was already under the rulership of the Roman. So this high priest, he was talking to the other scribes and Pharisees and says, don't you know that it would be better for this man to die for the whole nation, so that the nation should not perish, and that he's not going to die only for this nation, but for the children of God that were scattered abroad. So this is further proof that the people of Israel were already gone. They were scattered abroad in Africa specifically, along with a good portion of the tribe of Judah during the Greek captivities, who fled from the Greeks persecution. He's talking about them. He's talking about those people who fled from Israel into Africa, running away from slavery. And this is further proof that there was already a great deal of the Israelites in Africa, including the northern kingdom and a portion of the southern kingdom, Judah. So here, this is the Messiah himself in this passage, having a conversation with a Canaanite woman, a Gentile woman. A Gentile is somebody from a non-Israelite heritage. And for the people out there who don't know anything about the Bible, the Most High, at this time, the Most High was not dealing with the Gentile. It was only dealing with the nation of Israel, because the laws was not given to anybody else outside of the nation of Israel, for those out there who don't know anything about the Bible. So he said to this Canaanite woman who was beseeching him for him to heal her daughter, he said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The house of Israel is the northern kingdom, because they were already lost. He said, I am only sent to these people because they were already lost. They were into exile in Africa, along with the other tribe, with the other portion of Judah who went into Africa during the Greek captivities. That's what it's referring to. These 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then there you go again. This is the Messiah. He's giving a commandment to the 12 apostles, to the 12 disciples. He's telling them, hey, you don't have to go to the ways of the Gentile. Don't go preach to the Gentile, but go rather to the lost sheep of the northern kingdom and the people that fled into Africa. That's what it means. To the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The house of Israel is the northern kingdom. Go and find your brother over there, man. Go find them and you preach the word, but not to these other nations. So obviously, the northern kingdom was not there ever since, like I told you earlier in the video. After the Assyrians captivities, they were gone. You never heard about them again, all the way up till the time of Christ. And that's what's going on right now. He's telling you that they are lost, the house of Israel. You don't even heard about them. You only hear about Jerusalem, Judea, and the tribe of Judah, the southern kingdom, because they were already lost. They are in Africa. They were already in Africa at this time. That's why he said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the tribe of the house of Israel. Let's get some more. Now, this is Christ right here speaking to the Israelite in Jerusalem. He's speaking to the Judean and the people from the southern kingdom. He says, when you see the Romans coming in, if you see the Jerusalem surrounded by the Roman armies, you better get ready to flee into the mountains. Go to Africa. That's essentially what it means. And then he's prophesying the vengeance that's going to befall, that's going to fall upon the cities. He's prophesying what is going to happen to the children of Israel from the southern kingdom. He said that they're going to fall by the edge of the sword, and they're going to be led away captive into all nations, as prophesied in the Old Testament. And Jerusalem, most importantly, Jerusalem is going to be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentile be fulfilled. So that means this prophecy right here is marking the beginning of the last migration of the Israelites that's going to happen. This is the Messiah who's prophesying the last migration of the Israelite from Jerusalem into Africa. This is exactly what he's saying. He said, when you see the Romans coming in, you better get ready to go to flee into the mountains. And what you're going to realize is that the mountain that he was talking about was the land of Africa. And we're going to get into that in a minute from the history books. So now he's prophesying that the people of Jerusalem is going to be led captive by the Romans. And they're going to flee from Israel into Africa from the Roman persecution. They're going to be led captive into all nations, man, from the four corners of the earth. And Jerusalem is going to be inhabited by the Gentiles, meaning that the inhabitant of the Israel today are the Gentile, which we're going to prove that in a minute. But first of all, let's find out if that prophecy that the Messiah was talking about, if he actually came to pass, if it was true or not. Let's find out after his death and his ascension up into heaven. Let's find out if it eventually happened, just like he said. Let's find out if there was still Israelite in the land of Israel, if they were all gone, if they were all scattered into all nations abroad. Let's find out. In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. You see, over 1 million of you Bantus fled from the land of Israel into the land of Africa, running away from the Romans, because the Romans were relentless and were determined to put all Israelites to death. And so in order to get any type of peace, the Bantus or the Israelites had to start migrating to those regions in Africa where the Roman didn't have any jurisdiction. And the market was full of Judeans, man. This is the same exact thing, just like the Messiah says, that when you see Jerusalem compassed or surrounded by the Roman armies, you better flee to get into the mountains. So the mountains was actually the lands of Africa. This is essentially what happened. And this is the last migration of the Bantus or the Israelites into Africa. And the slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves or black Judean slaves.
There is also other migrations of Israelites that we can deal with into Africa, especially from the Roman period. Continuing reading from this book, it says, the 12 boatloads of Jewish captives that Titus had deported from Palestine to North Africa about the year 71 CE reinforced the existing Jewish colonies. According to St. Jerome, Jewish communities formed an unbroken chain from India to the limits of Africa, and scholarly research has made it possible to fix the precise sites of those in North Africa. So let's deal with the uprisings. The relentless conflict between the Jews of Palestine and its Roman invaders, which lasted more than a century, had profound repercussions in the two great African provinces, enriching their Jewish communities with the thousands who were forced to leave Palestine or who immigrated voluntarily. It has been estimated that 30,000 Jews were deported to Carthage by Titus, and Josephus recorded the presence of 500,000 Jews in Caesarea in the first century of the Christian era. North Africa was at this time the center of an extensive conversion to Judaism. The Palestinians who found refuge in North Africa brought with them a smothering hate of the Roman oppressors, which erupted into a revolt every opportunity. And it may be assumed that many voyages through North Africa of leading Jewish personalities, especially those of Rabbi Akbar, archfoe of Roman paganism, were not unconnected with these events. According to Josephus, a group of zealots under the leadership of a certain Jonathan fomented a powerful insurrection against the Romans in Caesarea. Shortly after the fall of Jerusalem, the indigenous African Jews frustrated this revolt. Following the denunciation of the insurgents by the distinguished Jews of the city, Jonathan was seized and executed along with most of his adherents. It continues, the Jews, animated by a national and religious ardor that was almost apocalyptic in its fever, rose up against the Greeks of Caesarea and for 3 years withstood all attempts at repression, such as cannot be assumed to have been prompted only by the religious fever of the Caesarea community, even though its members were the most fanatic of all. The Jews must have been very numerous, militarily well organized, and in all probability supported by the Berbers. In any event, Caesarea was one of the last corners of the Roman world where there was a fighting Jewish army. It was the sword of the Jews that put an end to Greek Caesarea at the beginning of the 2nd century CE. It continues on saying that the initial military success of the Jews indicate an effective organization and an intense penetration of the Jews among the Berber masses. But the revolt, like the last insurrection of the Jews in Palestine against the Roman world, was foredoomed. Trajan, preoccupied by the war in the east against the Parthians, appointed Marcius Turbo to quell the uprising in North Africa, and there do not seem to have been any military repercussions in Tunisia or the Caesarean province. The brutal repercussions of 118 CE marked the end of the development of Judaism in Caesarea. The survivors fled westward into Caesarean province and southward, crossing the Sahara from oasis to oasis, eventually perhaps reaching as far as the Niger River. So because of the Jewish-Roman wars in Palestine and North Africa, you actually had Jews who fled Roman occupation as far as they could, passing the Sahara and perhaps reaching the Niger River. The book A History of the Jews complements the last source we just read really well. It says that Josephus, the Jewish historian, who lived 2 centuries later, described Caesarea as the center of a large Jewish population. A further increase in the Jewish numbers came as a result of the defeat of the Jews by Rome in 70 CE. So large was the Jewish population of Caesarea in the next generation that in the ill-fated uprisings of 115 through 117, the Jews almost overcame their pagan neighbors and the Roman armies. Rome's fearful vengeance caused many to flee farther west into the territory then known as Mauritania and now as Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. Other Jews from the former population of Cyrenaica fled completely beyond the reach of Rome into the desert to the south. Such is the explanation how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed a physical characteristic which is, it is said, still make them approximate very closely the original Jewish population of Palestine. So again, these Jews from the Jewish-Roman wars were making their way into the Sahara Desert. And to get a little bit more information on these Jews going into the Sahara Desert, we will be going to an introduction to the history of West Africa. And it reads, according to Della Fosse, the first permanent settlement of peoples from North Africa in Negro land occurred after the Jewish risings against Roman rule in Cyrenaica in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, which led to an exodus to the south and west. Some of these Jews, or more probably perhaps Judaized Berbers, who were pastoralists, crossed the Sahara and settled among the Soninke agriculturalists of the Niger Bend between the site of Timbuktu and Messina. And again, keep in mind, Eldad the Danite was said to have traveled with a Soninke Jew. So after reviewing everything we've went over, it wouldn't be insane to say that you have descendants of the tribes of Israel beyond the Sahara, specifically in West Africa. In fact, for the Portuguese, as for other Europeans, there was a powerful sense that there were Jewish polities representing the lost tribes of Israel in the African interior. In the 1830s, for instance, a religious journal noted Africa therefore presents the only remaining likely place, and the advocates for the existence of the 10 tribes very confidently maintain that they are enclosed in the interior of that unexplored country. And this is coming from Diaspora's perspectives on Jewish culture in the Mediterranean and beyond.
And that's the story of how the Bantu people lost sight of their Hebrew-Israelite identity. They strayed from the path of the Most High Yah, and as a result, He uprooted them from their promised land and scattered them to the one end of the earth. As we have seen, this was a fulfillment of His prophecies, which played out through various migrations from various captivities, the Assyrians to the Romans. Our research, backed by credible sources, revealed that they spread across the entire African continent. Special thanks to my fellow brothers, Will, Son of Yah, and Bantu Network for their tireless efforts in uncovering the truth. May Yahweh continue to guide and bless them. Now that we've witnessed the African Israelite diaspora, it's time to explore how they reached other parts of the world. Remember Deuteronomy 28:64. It says they will be scattered from one end of the earth to the other. Africa was just the beginning. The next chapter in our journey takes us to the Arab slave trade and transatlantic slave trade, where we will see how the Israelites were forcibly taken from Africa to other parts of the world. Stay tuned for part 2 as we continue to witness the Most High's promises. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me on this journey of discovery. I am Pasek Ayahukanan, and I'll see you in the next video. Shalom.